I love being here, and I have so many memories of my years with so many great friends being the senior ministers here, and I've been thinking of Bill Coffin ever since I came down the aisles. But I'm so glad to be here with Pastor Amy, and with you, and the great music, and with Kevin, who is a Freedom School person from Charlotte who came here. Thank you. And I am delighted that Riverside has been sponsoring a Freedom School. And one day, Freedom Schools are going to become Sunday schools because they are fun and they're child-centered. Not this Sunday school isn't, but we are really, and I think it's one of our most important works. I heard a story from a minister many years ago about a little boy in a public school whose teacher, on the first day of school, said to the children, "I love you all the same." Sometimes teachers lie. They don't love all children the same. And sometimes they have favorites. And sometimes that really results in lots of children feeling left out and left behind. And sometimes there are children that just are unattractive. And Teddy Stollett was a little boy that was unattractive, and the teacher, Jean Thompson, didn't like him. And you probably wouldn't like him too. He was a singularly unattractive child. He slouched in his seat, never paid attention. His clothes were always musty. His hair was unkempt. And he never bathed enough often to get rid of an unpleasant odor. And when she spoke to him, he always answered yeah or no. When she marked his papers, she got a perverse delight in putting X's next to the wrong answers. And when she put an F at the top of the paper, she should have known better. Teachers have records. She had records. First grade, Teddy is a good boy. He shows promise in work and attitude, but poor home situation. Second grade, Teddy is a good student, but he's too serious for a second grader. His mother's terminally ill. His father shows no interest. Third grade, Teddy is becoming withdrawn and detached. His mother died this year. Fourth grade, Teddy is a troubled child, needs help. He had records. She should have known. Christmas came. The children brought their presents and piled them on her desk, and they were all in brightly colored paper, except for Teddy's. His was wrapped in brown paper and held together with Scotch tape. But she was surprised that he had even brought a present. When she opened it, out fell a rhinestone bracelet with missing pieces and a bottle of cheap perfume that was almost empty. But she had the good sense to put the bracelet on and hold it up before the class and say, "Isn't this pretty?" And she dabbed a little bit of the perfume behind her ear. The other children began to snicker and giggled about the presents, but Jean had enough sense to try to calm them by her actions. At the end of the day, when the other children had all left, Teddy lingered and came over to her desk and said softly, "Miss Thompson, all day today, you smell just like my mother used to smell. And that's her bracelet you're wearing. It looks very nice on you. I'm really glad you like my presents." And when he left, she got down on her knees and asked God to forgive her. And the next day, when the children came and when Teddy came into the classroom, she was different. She reached out to the children with the kind of love that enables us to do the work. She nurtured him, and she nurtured all of them, and reached out to the ones who were having trouble, especially Teddy. She tutored him, and by the end of the school year, he had caught up with a lot of children and was even ahead of some. She didn't hear from Teddy for a long time. But then one day, there was a note saying, "Dear Ms. Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I graduated from high school. Love, Teddy Stollett." 4 years later, another note. "Dear Ms. Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I am second in my class. The university hasn't been easy, but I really liked it. Love, Teddy Stollett. 4 years later, another note. Dear Miss Thompson, as of today, I am Theodore J. Stollett, MD. How about that? And I'm going to be married the 27th of July, and would you come? I would like for you to sit where my mother would have sat, for you're the only family I have. My dad died last year. She went and she sat where his mother would have sat, and she deserved to be there. The irony of this story is that today there are Teddy Stolletts all over the world and all over this country, and we've got to see them. God did not make two classes of children, and we've all got to reach out and do things. So I really just want to reinforce and thank you for Freedom Schools. We've got a formerly homeless child who graduated 2 years ago with a 4.3 in electrical engineering at MIT. And she was able to be a Freedom School intern in the homeless shelter at DC General, which is a god-awful place. But she could say, I was here in and out of homeless shelters. I had a mentally ill mother, but I made it. And this year, I'm so proud to boast that we've got our first Rhodes Scholar out of our Beat the Odds program. Daddy's in prison. And he went to Texas Christian University as an athlete scholar, and he's at Balliol at Oxford. So these young people are doing remarkable things, but we've left them behind, and I consider them the pick of the leadership pool, and we have got to begin to understand about the crucial importance of investing in all of our children. And I just thank you for celebrating Children's Sabbath. I thank you for listening to children. I thank you for the Freedom Schools. Freedom Schools need to be everywhere, and public schools need to adopt the Freedom School pedagogy. We are looking at absolute extraordinary results. We just compared this year's assessment, not trying to brag, but just want to say that the things work. And the key, I think, is our non-white, young, college, energetic students who reflect what these children are. They come from the communities where these children come. And all the other comparative programs that are well-funded have certified teachers. Now, I'm trying to get everybody to go into teaching and stay out of law school. We don't need any more lawyers. We need young folk who are going to really be role models for our children. And 87% of the young people who teach children in Freedom Schools are African American, Latino American, Native Hawaiian, and Native American. And you can't be what you can't see. It's very much harder. And they need to see our children need to see people who are not just the cafeteria workers and the bus drivers and the janitors. They need to see the vibrancy. And it needs to be fun. There's no reason why learning can't be fun. And the energy of Freedom Schools, which I would urge you to visit, is just overwhelming. And so I, again, just thank you, and I wish every congregation would open these doors to after schools as well as the summer schools so that children have constructive, energetic, fun role models. And Kevin was very much involved in that in Charlotte. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. But at this moment, we're living in the most dangerous time I can remember ever. You're watching evil run amok, and they're trying to destroy everything that has been created to try to level the playing field, which we're still challenged to do. And I just hope my bottom line request today is don't let them do it. I'm not going to let my grandchildren have to fight these battles all over again. And we're going to have to stand up and fight back. Since the Poor People's Campaign, which many people said was a failure, it wasn't. And we're going to be laying out the chronology of laws that went and got enacted out of the Washington Research Project, but it became clear to me that anything you called black and brown and poor was going to have a shrinking constituency. But if you looked at children and cost effectiveness of investment in children and tried to break the cycle, that you could begin to make and build a huge coalition, and I think that has happened. There are about 50 laws on the books that weren't on when we began by coalition building and hard grunt work. But you know, 95% of all of our children now have access to health coverage. They're trying to tear CHIP down. That's our current thing. They cannot do it if you stand up and say no. They cannot have our children's health. They cannot take away the food from the Poor People's Campaign and the child nutrition in order to give massive new tax cuts to corporations and to the wealthiest individuals. Stand up and say no, and stand up for your children. It is time for the next major movement. We're looking toward the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign. I called Reverend Barber, who's a wonder, Hurricane Barber. He's a very gifted man, and what he's done in North Carolina in calling for a Poor People's Campaign is terrific. We're going to announce soon an End Child Poverty campaign, because we think that that's the way to go. We would never have gotten many of these laws passed had it not been through the lens of children, because we just don't like poor adults. But we have all got to wake up, get out of our comfort zones, fight the absolutely extraordinary effort, and I never get used to it after all these decades in Washington, that they're trying to destroy food for children, take away health care for children, take away early childhood and Head Start for children, and it's a massive revolution, take away help for homeless children in order to give billions and hundreds of billions of dollars in new tax cuts for people who are billionaires and millionaires. You just have to stand up and say no, and to do whatever you got to do. So we're going to be calling on you in the middle of this budget thing right now. We're going to know, we're trying to find a funding thing for CHIP come up next week. And we'll manage. I mean, I think we say our prayers, but then we go. And people, but you really have to get in here and hold the line, but then we have to have a positive vision of making sure that every child has enough to eat, has health care, has decent schooling, is safe and engaged in the summer and after school, and has an education system that is not a continuing example of being separate and unequal. We've got to equalize the funding. We've got to get teachers in there who really focus on children, and we've got to make children understand that there's a future worth doing. The reason we became a Children's Defense Fund is that I went out into the schools after Dr. King's assassination to tell them not to riot and not to loot. And a little boy about 13 looked me straight in the eye and said, "Lady, what future? I ain't got no future. I ain't got nothing to lose." And I have spent, thankfully, the last 50 years almost trying to answer that boy's truth. Next year, on the 50th anniversary, let's begin to move it and make that boy's truth a non-reality. And we're going to lay out an agenda. A couple of years ago, we commissioned the Urban Institute, because they're perceived as an objective group, to look at 9 policies we laid out and tell us what amount of poverty among children they could alleviate. And they came back and said that for $77 billion, we could eliminate 60% of the child poverty of all children, 60% all children child poverty, and 72% of black child poverty. We commissioned or ran a study with Nobel laureate economist Bob Solow at MIT to tell us how much it cost to keep then 14 million, now 13.2 million children in poverty. And he said in his introduction to that report that for many years Americans have allowed child poverty levels to remain astonishingly high, far higher than you would think a rich and ethical society would tolerate. The justification when one is offered at all has often been that action is expensive and that we have more will than wallet. I suspect, Solow said, that in fact our wallets exceed our will. But in any event, this concern for the drain on our resources completely misses the other side of the equation. Inaction has its costs too. And as an economist, I believe that good things are worth paying for. and that even if curing children's poverty were expensive, it would be hard to think of a better use in the world for money. If society cares about children, it should be willing to spend money on them. Not only does child poverty cost far more than its elimination would, we have so many better choices that reflect more just values as well as economic savings. And so I just hope that we will, when you hear the call, get the new things that are being studied now, join us in ending child poverty in the richest nation on earth. It is in our self-interest, but it is also what our faith demands. So be on call. What do? There are strange things that happen in all of our lives, and especially with me, but one day an old clipping showed up in my door of my home mailbox slot. And it was a ragged clipping, but I could read it. And it said, everything you need to know in life you can learn from Noah's Ark. And the first lesson from Noah's Ark was don't miss the boat. And the United States is going to miss the boat to lead and compete in our globalizing world because we're not preparing millions of our children to prepare to be ready for the future, especially non-white children who are the majority of our babies already and who will be the majority of our child population in a very few years. More than 60% of our public school children of all ages, 4th and 8th graders, cannot read at grade level, and 75% of Latino and Black children in these grade levels can't read or compute at grade level, and dropout rates are rampant. What is a child going to do in this globalizing world? They can't read or compute at the most basic levels. This is being sentenced. You're sentencing them to economic death into the cradle to prison pipeline. Got to break it up. Got to change it. Got to educate our folk. 71% of our 17 to 24-year-olds would fail to qualify if they applied for military service related to health problems, criminal records, drug abuse, literacy, and other education problems. Who's going to compete with the Chinese and the Japanese and all the other folk in a globalizing world if you can't even fill the military up with people who are competent and have been well educated? And I cannot stress long enough how we've got to break up that cradle to prison pipeline. And one of the things that we're insisting on is that we start, and we've made progress. You've got to hold it next week in Congress, and you've got to hold it and watch over the next months and years. You really got to get children the early investments that we as parents want for all of our children. Prenatal care, a high quality early childhood system. It's no mystery. You want for other people's children what you want for your own children. Schools that are ready for children. Schools that have teachers in them that reflect the backgrounds of these folk. There can be good teachers of all colors, but you need to have, it's hard to be what you can't see. And we're really trying to make sure that we have diverse textbooks and we have, a sense of history that is correct, but we need to make sure that our children have that early childhood foundation. Then every school needs to be equally funded, and we still don't have that all of these years after Brown versus Board of Education, and we need to stand up and say that's wrong, and we need to make sure that when parents have to work or when children are falling behind, that there is a freedom school after school and a safe place to be. And churches need to open up these doors and make sure that children have a home in them when they have no places else to go. I grew up in a family with a Baptist minister, and my parents never said, why doesn't somebody else do something? They always said, why do I do something? And Daddy said, God runs a full employment economy. And so you'll never lack for anything to do that is meaningful if you just look and see what the need is. And so I just hope that the church can really become the church and open up these doors and compete with the gangs and the drug dealers on the streets. And you're doing that, and I thank you. The second lesson, I'm about done. We're all in the same boat. And many Americans like to think they don't have any self-interest in ensuring a fair playing field for other people's children, especially poor and non-white children, who are going to be the majority of our children in 2020. But isn't it better to have them be a productive workforce than to have us have to support them in costly prisons? States are spending on average twice as much per prisoner as per public school pupil. That's a really dumb investment policy. And we need to close down Rikers Island while I'm thinking about it. It's a disgusting place. Lesson 3 from Noah's, this anonymous critic, it says, plan ahead. It wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And we need to recognize that tomorrow is today, and that children have only one childhood, and providing all of them a healthy start in that early childhood experience, first-rate schools, caring teachers who are reflective of the demographics of the child populations, and high expectations, and summer programs and after-school programs have got to be the first order of national, state, and community business in our quick-fix, quarterly, profit-driven culture. And we must stop the transfers of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the rich. Don't you let them talk about new billions in tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires when you've got 13.2 million children who are poor and homelessness is epidemic. Let's get out of our comfort zones. Let's say no. And so every one of your senators and congressmen ought to be hearing from you and making sure that they're standing up against. I can never get used to the greed. If you've got 1 billion, why do you have to have 2? I mean, there's got to be a concept of enough. And I don't deny anybody whatever they can earn through clever and imaginative and hard work. But if you've got all these children who are poor and the shelters breaming and the prisons teeming, we've got to say enough, because they don't seem to have any way of stopping and understanding that they are part of a nation and that all folks should be assured a minimum. There should be no hungry children in America. There should be no children without health care. There shouldn't be no children in homeless shelters. But there will continue to be, and it will be worse if you don't stand up and stop the backwards movements, and I know that we can. The last one on Noah's Ark's lesson that I want to say, and there were 4 or 5 more, and it's my favorite, and it's like, remember that the Ark was built by amateurs and the Titanic by experts. So many of us are waiting for Dr. King to come back. He's gone. We're it. And he taught us what selfless, sacrificial servant leadership could do. And all of us have got to not rely on experts. Dr. King didn't start a single movement. What he could do was respond and encapsulate and encourage and bring folk together. But it was the women of Montgomery, Joanne Robinson, people you never heard of, who for a long time had been laying the seeds for that movement, and Miss Parks happened to be the right one at the right time, who just decided she wasn't going to get up one more time. And they chose Dr. King. Joanne picked him because Dr. King had just moved to Montgomery, and he didn't have any baggage with him. But it really was something that came out of the community and reaching a point where you just won't take it anymore. Fred Shuttlesworth was key in Birmingham. The children in Birmingham, the Children's March, broke the back of Bull Connor. Dr. King was very worried about using children, but the children were the secret weapon in Birmingham. And they danced themselves into jail, and they changed the nation in a fundamental way. And we're going to be celebrating, one of the celebration spots is going to be back in that Birmingham church where the Jack and Jills lost a child. But I also have a staff member, and we have had many of them come out to Haley Farm over the years to tell their stories, but who was in the church, in the bathroom with the other girls who were killed. She heard the phone ring, and she ran across to answer it, and it was the bomber saying that a bomb was about to go off. So her life was changed. But we need to remember the sacrifice of children, little children who lost their lives, and we need to remember the sacrifice of all those young folk who sat in and all those young folk who went on freedom rides. But it's time to have a new form of activity and rebellion in a nonviolent way that meets with the new demands. But please be on alert. We will study the new things. We have shown through the Urban Institute study that we can end poverty and save a whole lot of money. We show how we can pay for it with military expenditures we don't need to make, with corporate loopholes we don't need to insure or let, And so we'll be sharing that with you in a few months, but we will have a strategy to focus in on making sure that every child has hope and every child has safety, if we can make it that way, with the guns that are killing them every second of the day. When you look at the figures on gun violence and death of black children and gun violence, we have lost, I think if I can remember, and I have it somewhere in here, because I'm not using my paper very well, almost 17 times more black children to gun violence in the last 4 decades than we lost in all the lynchings of people in history. We've got to stop the guns, and we've got to protect our children from guns. And when we did a study of what was most of concern to black children and black families, we were absolutely stunned and started a Black Community Crusade. But the first thing that we did was to start a gun violence campaign, because the number one issue, I thought they were going to say education or jobs. They said they were terrified. Parents were afraid that their children would live to adulthood, and children were afraid they were not going to live to adulthood. We've got to stop the guns. None of us is safe without it, and so I hope that that can be true of what we do. So I just hope that we will do what we've got to do for children. That Daddy said always to me that God ran that full employment economy, and don't ask why doesn't somebody do something, ask why don't I do something. And so I'm here today to sort of say please to Riverside, let's each make a commitment that I am going to do something, and I am going to make sure that I engage other people in doing something. We really owe our children a better life, and we have the power to do that, and so I'm really looking forward to working with you in ending child poverty in the next 5 years. We'll be very specific about it. We've got lots of ways to pay for it. We don't need more F-35 fighter jets. Don't work, none of them work. Tens of billions of dollars been wasted away. We just need to say, no, here's how you can pay for them, but you're going to put children first. So I'm looking forward to it. Let me end with a story from Riverside, which moved me very deeply when Bill Coffin was here. And it was called No Room in the Inn, and in anticipation of Christmas coming up and all of us worshiping the poor baby, and the poorest, most famous poor baby in history, whom we purport to follow. It's a wonderful story, and so as we prepare for Christmas, I wanted to just end with it. And I was trying to remember who shared it with me. I don't know. I have all these things that sort of show up in my mail, and I'm very grateful for it. But this was one of them, and it occurred on Christmas Eve. And the pews of your Riverside Church, New York's Riverside Church, were packed. The Christmas pageant was underway and had come to the point at which the innkeeper was to turn away Mary and Joseph with the resounding line, "There's no room in the inn." The innkeeper was played by Tim, an earnest youth with Down syndrome. He had only one line to remember: "There's no room in the inn." He'd practiced it again and again with his parents and the pageant director and seemed to have mastered it. So Tim stood at the altar, bathrobe costume firmly belted over his broad stomach, as Mary and Joseph made their way down your center aisle. They approached him, said their lines as rehearsed, and waited for his reply. Tim's parents, the pageant director, and the whole congregation almost leaned forward as if willing him to remember his line. And he finally belted out, "There's no room in the inn." But just as rehearsed, and so the congregation took a big sigh of relief. But as Mary and Joseph turned on cue to travel further, Tim suddenly yelled, "Wait!" when they all turned back, startled, along with the congregation, and looked at him in surprise. And Tim said, "You can stay at my house." My friend, said Bill Coffin, stood up in the pulpit, said amen, and sat down. and they said it was the best sermon he never preached. Let's get our movement going.